Like Joe Brunoli, Birrion Sondahl does a good job at defining modern fascism. I'll link to the show we did about modern fascism in the show notes with Joe Brunoli, and you'll see that there's quite a bit of overlap between the two. The shitlibs against whom I've been railing lately, such as Paul Street, I think intentionally misrepresent what fascism actually is. The most important point is that the shitlibs who misrepresent fascism make it seem like it's the cult of the people leading it instead of the system that we've had for at least 70 years, maybe 100 years. We have a fascistic system that needs to be overthrown. So to make fascism any one person, such as Mussolini or Hitler or Donald Trump, is a mistake. And it may be an intentional mistake. It works right into the hands of the sheepdogs to make someone out to be a villain, because then lesser evil voting comes in. As long as we have a horrible person instead of a horrible system, then we'll vote for somebody who is as bad as Joe Biden is, who is fascistic as Joe Biden is, in order to overcome someone villainous like Donald Trump. For our intents and purposes, it's most important to make sure that we understand fascism is a corporate phenomenon. To fight fascism, we need to fight corporations. And for that reason, anyone who's fighting to get us to vote for someone like Joe Biden is fighting on behalf of fascism. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Now, before I launch into this, it would behoove us to remember what right and left actually mean. The people who sat on the left side of the French Parliament were in favor of patriotism, were in favor of the people. The people who sat on the right side, in the right wing of Parliament, were in favor of the oligarchy. Actually, they were in favor of the monarchy, but in our case, it's the oligarchy. Left wing means you're in favor of true democracy that benefits the people. The best way to keep it straight is to realize that monarchy and oligarchy are equivalent for all intents and purposes. On to Birrion. With the recent occupation of the capital by far-right white supremacists, so these white supremacists are not necessarily right-wing according to the definition I just gave you, and nationalists, nationalism is a different topic. Nationalism, as we've seen historically, could be either right-wing or left-wing. But Birrion is right that it is important to look into the fascist threat in the United States. We just need to know what it is. We hear the term fascism often, but do not have a clear definition of it. Pinning down an exact definition of fascism is so difficult that George Orwell once wrote, "It is in internal politics that this word has lost the last vestige of meaning. For if you examine the press, you will find that there is almost no set of people, certainly no political party or organized body of any kind, which has not been denounced as fascist during the past 10 years. He goes on to note, "It will be seen that, as used, the word fascism is almost entirely meaningless. It is almost as if the word fascism is redefined every time it is used. Nevertheless, it is important to establish a general framework around the word." Fascism began in Italy and takes its name from the Latin fasces, a bound bundle of wooden rods with a projecting axe blade. The significance of this symbol is unity, strength, and justice. A bundle is stronger than a single rod. When it began, fascism had no clear ideology. As Alfredo Rocco said, "It is true that fascism is above all action and sentiment, and that such it must continue to be. From its origin in reactionary fascist action groups designed to fight communism and the working class, it eventually evolved into a firmer ideology." Let me break in here and say that this point is very important. The point of fascism is to fight against the working class. As Mussolini described in the doctrine of fascism, no individuals or groups, political parties, cultural associations, economic unions, social classes, outside the state. No individuals or groups outside the state. Traditional fascism, which had its heyday in the 1930s in Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany, was based around the totalitarian nation-state and imperialistic expansion of this state. Mussolini wrote, "Imperialism is at the base of the life of every people which desires economic and spiritual expansion. Endless war is a feature of the fascist state. However, an imperialist totalitarian state is not a true definition of fascism. Stanley G. Payne warns that any definition of common characteristics of fascist movements must be used with great care, for fascist movements differed from each other as significantly as they held notable new features in common. After noting this, he goes on to list several of these characteristics which can be used as a framework to help identify fascist movements. These are shown in the following table. A. The fascist negations: anti-liberalism, anti-communism, anti-conservatism, though with the understanding that fascist groups were willing to undertake temporary alliances with groups from any other sector, most commonly with the right. B. Ideology and goals: creation of a new nationalist authoritarian state based not merely on traditional principles or models, organization of some new kind of regulated, multi-class, integrated national economic structure, whether called national corporatist, national socialist, or national syndicalist. This is really good information. The goal of empire, or a radical change in the nation's relationship with other powers, which makes it clear, as Joe Brunoli also points out, that the United States has been fascistic for a long, long time, even, as Joe says, from before the time of corporations. And specific espousal of an idealist, voluntarist creed, normally involving the attempt to realize a new form of modern, self-determined secular culture, which I would say resembles religious culture in lots of ways. Style and organization: emphasis on aesthetic structure of meetings, symbols, and political choreography, stressing romantic and mystical aspects. Attempted mass mobilization with militarization of political relationships and style, and with the goal of a mass party militia. Positive evaluation and use of, or willingness to use, violence. Extreme stress on the masculine principle and male dominance while espousing the organic view of society. Let me break in and say those 2 points, the United States military intelligence complex's willingness to use violence, not to mention the stress on the masculine principle and male dominance. The CIA has been running things for a long time, and that's another piece of evidence to show us that the United States has been fascistic for a while. Exaltation of youth above other phases of life, emphasizing the conflict of generations, at least in affecting the initial political transformation. Specific tendency toward an authoritarian, charismatic, personal style of command, whether or not the command is to some degree initially elective. And on the side of the shitlibs, that's a pretty good reason to say that Donald Trump is fascistic. And the truth is, Donald Trump is fascistic, but the fascistic system he walked into made the perfect storm. So the point we'll come back to again and again: if you want to get rid of fascism, you have to break down the system. Getting rid of a specific cult-like leader is not going to solve the problem. As Joe Brunoli has pointed out, fascism survives in Italy. It has survived Mussolini. We can't stress this enough. Fascism is a system, it's not a person. Many of the defining characteristics of 20th century fascist movements can be seen in this table. However, the table is incomplete as it lacks a class-based analysis. The fascist negation of anti-communism is one which Mussolini himself described. Fascism also denies the immutable and irreparable character of the class struggle, which is the natural outcome of this economic conception of history. Even though fascism denies class struggle, fascism came to power in Italy and Germany as a reactionary movement against socialism and communism through class struggle. This violent class struggle was led by the petty bourgeoisie and carried out a reign of terror against the working class. And the shitlibs I've been railing against since I started this channel are the current equivalent. They are the petty bourgeoisie. The Communist International defined fascism in 1933 as the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinist, and most imperialist elements of finance capital. So if you're talking about chauvinism, you've got Donald Trump. If you're talking about imperialism, you've got Joe Biden. They're both fascists. Fascism tries to secure a mass basis for monopolist capital among the petty bourgeoisie, appealing to the peasantry, artisans, office employees, and civil servants who have been thrown out of their normal course of life, and particularly to the declassed elements in the big cities, also trying to penetrate into the working class. Writing in exile in the same year, Leon Trotsky came to a similar conclusion. German fascism, like Italian fascism, raised itself to power on the backs of the petty bourgeoisie, which it turned into a battering ram against the organizations of the working class and the institutions of democracy. But fascism in power is least of all the rule of the petty bourgeoisie. On the contrary, it is the most ruthless dictatorship of monopoly capital. That is important. It is the most ruthless dictatorship of monopoly capital. That's why Joe Biden is the quintessential fascist, because he's the quintessential capitalist. This definition of fascism as the dictatorship of capital lines up closely with Mussolini's own attempt to create a system that he called corporationism. Mussolini framed his corporationism as an alternative to socialism or capitalism, saying, "Corporative economy arises at the historic moment when both the militant phenomena, capitalism and socialism, have already given all that they could give." This was misleading, as rather than being a departure from capitalism, fascism is one form that capitalism takes in response to its own internal crises. In practice, Mussolini's corporationism bears little difference from monopoly capitalism. Ding, ding, ding! Fascism has evolved since the time of Mussolini and Hitler. Fascism in the modern day goes beyond the strictly nationalist view outlined above by Stanley Payne. The most succinct definition of modern-day fascism is that given by sociologist William Robinson in Accumulation, Crisis, and Global Police State. In distinction, 21st century fascism involves the fusion of transnational capital with reactionary and repressive political power, an expression of the dictatorship of transnational capital. In both cases, however, fascism is a response to deep structural crises of capitalism, such as that of the 1930s and the one that began with the financial meltdown of 2008. This is the current state of fascism, the dictatorship of transnational capital. As capitalism is a global phenomenon, so is fascism. The fascist movements inside the United States reflect this rule of the transnational corporate class. I realize that the process of sorting this stuff out is a little bit dry, but we absolutely have to understand it, mostly so we can combat the controlled opposition sheepdogging shitlibs. If we don't understand that fascism is the dictatorship of transnational capital, we are not going to understand what's going on right now. We are not going to understand that fascism is only going to grow stronger under Biden than it was under Trump. And the other thread that we need to keep picking at is that we won't take down the system unless we take it down from the left edge first. The shitlibs don't want us to pick on Bernie Sanders or on AOC or the Squad. They want us to leave alone the leftmost wing of our fascistic system. But until we dismantle the faux-aggressive left wing, we won't see the right wing for what they are. It isn't a matter of preference either. We absolutely can't dismantle the right until we dismantle the left first. Why is that? Inside of our good cop, bad cop duopoly, we have no true left. What poses as left is merely controlled opposition. And as Lenin would say, the best way to defeat the opposition is to lead it ourselves. You're going to get a lot of pushback from your shitlib friends and acquaintances when you say that we need to take out the left side of the duopoly first. That said, feel free to leave your comments under the videos so we can sort this out. If you're having difficult arguments with shitlibs, bring those arguments here and we'll address them together. The OBAMA-FICATION of the Squad strengthens the right at the expense of the left, by Danny Haiphong. The so-called progressive model would have us wait half a dozen election cycles before taking real action on the demand for Medicare for All and a Green New Deal. I want to put a plug in for Black Agenda Report. I first understood what a sheepdog Bernie Sanders is from reading the Black Agenda Report. If you want to know more about that, go back to episode 464, Bernie the Sheepdog, Hillary 2016, and Joe 2020, Black Agenda Report. I'll link to that one underneath too. Black Agenda Report has long understood the Democratic Party to be a graveyard for social movements in the United States. An online push led by Jimmy Dore and the Movement for a People's Party to force the vote only further confirmed the true function of the Democratic Party: controlled opposition. The call was simple. So-called progressive activists pushing Force the Vote asked progressive members of the Democratic Party to withhold their vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House in exchange for a floor vote on Medicare for All. Democrats have grown in number while the Democratic Party's control of the House has shrunk, thereby making Nancy Pelosi's path to Speaker of the House more precarious. Not one member of the squad withheld their vote for Pelosi or made the demand of a floor vote for Medicare for All a subject of protest during the proceedings. What was revealed in the weeks leading up to the vote, however, was the ongoing OBAMA-FICATION of the squad. Jimmy Dore and other activists demanding a Medicare for All floor vote were relentlessly attacked on social media. Benjamin Dixon, Sam Cedar, Nomiki Konst, and other mouthpieces of the so-called progressive media accused Dore of being a federal agent, an Assad apologist, and a grifter. Popular left-ish journalists Crystal Ball and Kyle Kulinski agreed with the tactic on principle, but maintained their loyalty to the squad as a viable left-wing political force. Activists in the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, renounced Jimmy Dore publicly but avoided the political issue of the floor vote despite the demand being a key part of their organizing strategy toward Congress. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez insinuated on Twitter that Dore's brash and profanity-laden criticisms amounted to violence toward her. The backlash against Force the Vote is indicative of a hive mentality among so-called progressive Democrats that is eerily reminiscent of the period of Obama's presidential reign. Obama's 8 years in the Oval Office were a lonely time for those at Black Agenda Report and anyone else who upheld the principles of black self-determination, socialism, and class struggle. Nearly the entire left ignored or condemned criticisms leveled against Obama. Obama was the chosen one, and his status as the first black president was beyond reproach. Critics of Obama from the left were called racists and GOP apologists. Paul Street would call us the Trumpan left. Obama's impact on the political consciousness of the left was so immense that black Americans, typically the most progressive constituency on issues of economic justice and war, had grown more economically optimistic and pro-U.S. intervention than ever before by the end of Obama's first presidential term. In 2016, I wrote a 10-part series on the Obama legacy and clearly delineated how the first black president operated as the more effective evil of U.S. imperialism. Obama was the greater of two evils. Conditions for black America worsened under Obama, with black wealth placed on a collision course towards zero during his 2 terms. Obama refused to prosecute bankers and killer cops, but found time to sip contaminated water in Flint, Michigan, and call protesters thugs in Baltimore in the aftermath of the police murder of Freddie Gray. Furthermore, Obama's grand bargain with the Republican Party included a nonstop regime of austerity that ballooned the war machine at a time when left critics of Obama were being marginalized and denounced at every turn. The political stagnation engendered by Obama's sheer presence in the White House paved a smooth road for Donald Trump's successful 2016 presidential campaign. For many on the left, the silver lining of the emergence of Donald Trump was the growing numbers of young people in the Democratic Party who threw their support behind Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and others who deemed themselves democratic socialists. In the last 4 years, the word socialism has become a popular term among young people, and majorities in the United States have declared firm support for policies such as Medicare for All and a Green New Deal. Yet, little was done to fight for these policies in the halls of Washington. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi dismissed the squad as a pesky minority while the corporate media ran nonstop interference for the DNC's marginalization of its progressive wing. Under these political conditions, one would think that those who worked tirelessly to elect Sanders, AOC, and the rest of the squad would be raising their voices and fighting even more boldly for Medicare for All and a host of other demands. The opposite has happened. Instead of protesting the DNC and challenging the squad to stand up to their corporate adversaries, forces in the Democratic Socialists of America and the so-called progressive media have become more interested in careers and committee seats than with the needs of the masses. Their opposition to Force the Vote revealed the bankruptcy of a model of change which relies upon electing progressive-sounding Democrats to bring about social transformation that only the power of the masses of people can truly achieve. This model mobilizes millions to bring an AOC into political office, then tells the starving and oppressed masses to wait for another half-dozen election cycles before taking real action on the demand for Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, or anything else that would alleviate their suffering. The failure of this model for change is clearly demonstrated in the fact that the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party has been far from it on key issues shaping the future of humanity itself. No true protests beyond tweets were leveled against the CARES Act stimulus plan, which sent trillions of dollars upward to the richest banks, as tens of millions were sent to unemployment lines beginning in March of 2020. On the issue of war and peace, the squad has followed Bernie Sanders into the abyss of imperialist piggishness. AOC met with fascists in Bolivia who engineered a short-lived coup in 2019, closed the door on Max Blumenthal when asked about her stance on the U.S. regime change war on Venezuela, and sent a Christmas Eve message to the CIA-backed Dalai Lama in support of democracy in China. Ilhan Omar voted in favor of U.S. support for NATO in 2020. Members of the squad also mounted little challenge to the renewal of the Patriot Act, a clear signal that the squad will play ball with the war machine whenever it is deemed convenient. Politics is not a purity contest. It is, however, a contest for power. The failures of the squad and the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party reveal the true contours of power in the United States. Capital reigns supreme, and the left-ish elements of the Democratic Party find it far easier to follow the Obama model of leadership than to break from corporate captivity. The squad poses as an alternative to corporate power during election cycles, only to discipline their millions of supporters into accepting capitulation to the establishment once elected. That's what sheepdogs do. As with Obama, squad leaders have begun to frame all criticism of their failures as hostile to the cause of social justice itself. In other words, Democratic Party leadership must be obeyed for the squad to exist. This is what is meant by the Obama-FICATION of AOC and the rest of the squad. Reverence for personalities only empowers the political right. During the pandemic, right-wing populists such as Joshua Hawley have risen to prominence by occupying political space that should be held by the left. Donald Trump rose to power off of the cognitive dissonance engendered by Obama's disastrous policies, and even gained 10 million more voters in his loss to Joe Biden. A good portion of these supporters went on to invade and defile Congress at a Stop the Steal rally held on January 6th. This event gave further credence to the conclusion that anyone who calls themselves the left must make a clean break from the Democratic Party that is responsible, in large part, for the epochal chaos of the Trump period. Only then can an actual struggle for socialism begin. If you haven't bumped into Danny Haiphong before, I urge you to follow him on Twitter and read anything he writes.